Have you ever held off adopting a tool, waiting for perfection? Maybe you've heard people say, the tool's not quite ready, or this model's not good enough for me. Today, we're going to be covering the best time to start generative AI pilots. Yesterday. And the second best time, which is right after this episode. So let's get into practical prompting. Welcome to Practical Prompting. My name's Alex Kalish, and I'm going to help turn generative AI from a buzzword into business value for your organization and your life in general. I lead an experimentation team for a global operations at a large tech company. But today I'm speaking only as a private citizen. The views expressed today in this podcast are my own and do not reflect any employer's positions and contain no internal or confidential information. If you're ready, let's get started before we're ready, actually. First up, I want to talk a little bit about myth busting. There's this myth of the perfect tool. It's right around the corner. It's coming. The perfect tool it's just out there. We have to find it. There's a couple different ways that I've seen teams and leaders fall into this perfect tool trap. One of them is a sunk cost fallacy. So that we spend all of this effort, teams investing months, comparing platforms, figuring out different capabilities, analyzing cost-benefit analysis, rather than actually just testing an idea and seeing how to get this started in the workplace. So when there's all this sunk cost, this time, these leaders are like, man, we did all this time, we did all this effort. Instead of moving forward and learning very quickly, there is analysis paralysis or a sunk cost fallacy associated with just waiting. Maybe it's going to take weeks or months. At the speed that generative AI is changing, the same questions I asked generative AI today, I asked a month ago, and it was not able to do. A good example is that it could not read my handwriting. ChatGPT could not read my handwriting a month and a half ago. As of early July, it now can read my handwriting almost perfectly. Don't get me wrong, my handwriting is not the best in the world, and there's a couple letters it gets wrong, but it's significantly better than the error message I saw only a month and a half ago when trying to do this. So when we're talking about sunk cost, even in terms of, hey, why don't we wait another couple weeks and just do some analysis on this? That wait and see approach is so much more detrimental in this era of generative AI speed moving so much faster. Another reason why this perfect tool trap might show up is that tools don't necessarily make capability, or they don't necessarily create value themselves. The value comes from decisions, not necessarily dashboards in this generative AI environment. So when we're talking about a generative AI tool or a generative AI capability, being able to leverage it and extract value comes from the decisions you use by using the tool, not necessarily by having the best tool out there. If you still don't make decisions and make changes and nothing changes, you're still not getting that value out of it. And you might end up just trying to find this perfect tool. Hey, it should be able to do this. It should automate this for us. My recommendation is to move faster. Get started today. Another flavor of perfect tool trap that I find teams and people falling into is the vendor paralysis. Let's just wait until the next release. There's this great update that's coming. When it has this new feature, we'll be able to do it. We should look at it at that point. And it's just kicking the can down the road. You're continuing to wait and see rather than getting started today, realizing and changing workplace workflows. Not just workflows, you're changing every person's in your organization and the way that they even think about work is going to shift radically in the next months to years. And so by waiting even just a couple months, that lagging effect is only going to impact performance in the future and being able to change that mindset faster. The next up is, hey, there's maybe some psychological safety that people see from ugly pilots. So if we're waiting for a perfect pilot or a pilot to have the best info, perfect visibility, let's go through every single step. How are we going to survey people? How are we going to make sure that the value is there? Now, all of a sudden, instead of going fast and figuring out things as we go, embracing imperfection, and how there are going to be times where a GenAI pilot is not going to work, but being able to rapidly assess that and discard it while capturing those lessons learned, so much more valuable than that. Let's wait. Let's really firm up how we're going to pilot this effectively. Start with a small team, and we'll get into that more. There's also hidden opportunity cost with every single week that you delay creating or implementing some sort of pilot in generative AI is a week of lost cycle time. Lower insights, slower insights. You have the opportunity to get enterprise access at a very cheap and reasonable cost for small teams. And you'll see the business value in the terms of, at the low end, we're talking a 10% productivity improvement. And that's not to mention the impact of quality when using generative AI appropriately. And that's really key. When we talk about practical prompting, practical usage of generative AI, it's not just okay to type in a small sentence and just copy and paste the output and be like, I'm done. There's this component of human in the loop, of making sure that generative AI is an augmentative force. And studies out there, there's 15, 20 different studies already that I could reference off the top of my head, which highlight how a person who's using generative AI as an augmentative force, as a check base, as something where they look at the output and refine and iterate and use it as a tool, not just a copy paste, I'm replacing what I'm doing with the output here. And that's really important because the hidden opportunity cost of waiting for the perfect tool means that there's going to be less people that are using that type of mentality when approaching generative AI. So I want to go into a small case study about Pennsylvania's ChatGPT enterprise pilot. This pilot went on from 2024 through March of 2025. So just taking a step back, the scene, Governor Shapiro had an executive order in 2023, number 19, which ordered agencies to experiment with generative AI underneath some core values: accuracy, equity, privacy, etc. The pilot design was a 12-month test, and there were 175 volunteers across 14 different agencies, all in the Pennsylvania public sector. No custom building going on. Users just simply logged into a ChatGPT enterprise access. And this is like a pretty impactful, forward-thinking government program, because government operations usually are a little bit slower to adopt some of the new technological advancements. However, this pilot got off the ground very quickly, didn't stand up any new architecture, and it wasn't looking for perfection. It was looking for what's available right now, how can we test it and learn from it. So who took part in this? Well, there were 5 different waves, 5 different cohorts, starting in March 2024 through March 2025. Roles spanning from HR to public policy, finance, IT, so information technology, human resources, HR, for those that are unfamiliar with the acronym, communications, you name it. Bunch of different types of roles in these cohorts. The experience of the people in these cohorts wasn't all just, yeah, I use generative AI all the time. Of course, I want to start using it at work. 48% of the 175 people, first-time ChatGPT users, never used it before. Also, there is union folks were covered, and there were non-covered union folks as well. So there was a couple different archetypes that this pilot found as users started engaging with ChatGPT Enterprise. There were some super users. 30% of those 175 were daily. Multiple different tasks, tons of adoption, workflows were changing. Those were the super users. You can get to the next archetype was these like the single high value task users, where a consistent task, like maybe it's policy analysis, maybe it's some amount of research. People in this 18% or 18% of folks in this bucket were just a single high task, or very few numbers of high tasks that they use it very frequently, and it was super helpful for. Then there's the general sporadic users, 48% of that 175, which kind of used it as a ad hoc, this is better than Google, but I'm just using it because it's a little bit better than Google. And then there were the non-users. So of the 175, there were still 4% that dropped off early, not using the tools. So what were some of the things that they found? Well, the problem with some of these roles, one of them was a human resource classification maze. So there were 3,600 different job descriptions, and manually matching which ones were similar was taking a long time. So one of the users of generative AI took this and started ideating within generative AI. They went to generative AI and said, hey, how can I solve this? I've got a whole bunch of job descriptions. It's a really painful task for me to do manually. How can generative AI help me in this arena? And sure enough, generative AI came back, and it was like, let's make a custom GPT. Let's make a custom GPT that evaluates the descriptions and suggests matches. And this solution took no longer than maybe 5 hours from, hey, this is really bothering me, to I have a working system that has completed all of the matching. This took hours of effort into minutes. So this HR classification super user started thinking in terms of, how can I address this pain point that I have? It's very manual. How can I start leveraging generative AI to help me with this problem? And one of those solutions was to create a custom GPT which matches. And so they did that. And it was hugely helpful. There's another group that was in charge of drafting policy and the security associated with doing so. While drafting policy, there is a certain amount of privileged access that goes on until that policy is made live. So the security engineer was talking through, how do I set up a system that makes it really easy for policy to be access privileged, and maybe identifying the gaps early on, and then adopting this throughout the entire policy-making process. And this security lead was able to create policy and create a system where that access, that privileged access, was just baked in from the outset. And ChatGPT was able to help prompt and draft policy, identify gaps and adapt or adopt new types of phrasing, new ideas. Now, granted, this is an important caveat here. It wasn't a copy paste. They didn't just take the output and copy that, paste it into a policy document, get that approved. No, this was part of a human in the loop system where the AI was an augmentative force, not just I'm just going to copy and paste this. Additionally, there is some like IT staff who were struggling with some of the jargon that IT professionals were using, and their customers internal to the government didn't understand what some of that IT jargon was. So we've got very smart technological people trying to communicate with very smart public facing government workers, and there was just this knowledge gap associated with it. The IT folks were talking in terms of solid state drives and random access memory and networking uplink and downlink speeds, and it wasn't getting across to the users, the customer base. And so one of the IT professionals was like, how could I solve this problem? There's this gap. We keep telling the users to do one thing and they have no idea how to do it. And so generative AI helped walk through, well, there's a couple different things you could do. One of them was to create a draft GPT or a custom GPT, which would take a draft of an email or a communication and remove the jargon and make it much more approachable for business leaders that didn't understand how the IT systems might work at a more detailed level. And so what this ended up doing was the stakeholder documentation shipped a significantly amount faster. Instead of back and forth meetings discussing how and what something meant, it was just a single email that had been drafted, put through generative AI, regenerated with a little bit easier to understand information, and then sent off for stakeholder decisions. This rapidly changed how the government organization was working. So I talked in terms of a lot of wishy-washy. Let's get into some stats here, some measured impact. So across the pilot, the 175 people who use this, every single day that they used it, on average, they saved 95 minutes. So if you're working 8 hours a day and you're saving over an hour and a half of time based on just leveraging generative AI tools, what more do you need? What else do you need in order to say, we need to start getting this going right now in a pilot? Like I said, the best time to experiment with generative AI was yesterday. The second best time is right now. Another measurable impact was that there was a significant amount of moderately complex tasks that were being done across the board. So 51% of tasks were considered moderately complicated, with only 25% being simple. There's 5 different complexity levels. There's very simple, simple, moderate, complex, very complex. And before ChatGPT, before this pilot, 51% of tasks were considered moderate. 17% were considered complex. 4% were considered very complex. Now, those same users started leveraging ChatGPT, asking, how could I use ChatGPT for this task, for this complex task that's in front of me? And what it did is it shifted all of that complexity down. So there was still 1% of the tasks were very complex versus the 4% before using generative AI. 6% of the time, so it went from 17% complex down to 6%, were just complex tasks. So again, 11% difference in terms of, 13% difference in terms of complex and very complex tasks being just moved towards moderate or simple. So the moderate bucket was at 51% before the pilot. It went down to 31% in the using the generative AI solutions. And simple tasks rose from 25% before ChatGPT pilot to 42%. And the very simple tasks went from 2% of the time before ChatGPT to 19%. So what we saw across this entire pilot was that there was a shift towards tasks that were thought of as complex, taking a lot of time, taking a lot of effort, and shifting everything towards more simple tasks. Now, don't get me wrong, there were still complicated tasks, but it freed up the time that would otherwise have been used on those more complicated tasks. And now all of a sudden, tasks were completed within less than 15 minutes that otherwise would have taken a lot longer. So the users overall, 85% were satisfied or highly satisfied. I think it's 67% were highly satisfied, or nope, I got it right here. Very positive was 65%. Very positive experience, and somewhat positive being another 25%. Nope, I don't think math is mathing right now. It ended up being 85% of the overall satisfaction was very satisfied, or overall satisfaction, excuse me. And this is half. This is in relation to half of people being complete GenAI rookies, folks that hadn't used it before. Now, another measurable impact is that there was no single type of guaranteed success. A lot of this had to do with mindset and training, which trumped role or seniority. So there were folks that just barely learned how to use ChatGPT that were doing things that more senior folks were spending weeks doing. Because of that mindset and training shift, there was a significant change in the tasks that were completed by the types of roles inside of the organization. So why did this off-the-shelf pilot work so well? Well, there was zero new infrastructure. Like there was no, we need to make this and block out our internal proprietary data. We have to have our own separate tech stack and make sure that customer information is, no, everything was just using ChatGPT Enterprise, which has a certain amount of security baked in. It is a software as a service, and so there's a certain amount of security already baked in. But there was no new infrastructure. There was no, we got to go back and forth on making what tool features for this usage. Nope, it's just right out of the box. There was a low friction training. So office hours, there was an AI 101, OpenAI prompt workshops. All of these helped get that half of the users to understand how to use these tools a little bit more. And last but not least, this pilot is emblematical of how generative AI should be used right now, which is human in the loop. Participants should be editing their inputs and outputs for nuances, and ChatGPT should be seen as an expert colleague, but not a replacement. Some of the best findings from the usage is that it was really impactful for making sure that human nuance was there. Like the number one, like 49% of the time, users reported having to include additional nuance. And don't get me wrong, there's ways to improve and reduce the need for that additional nuance by prompting effectively. But that human in the loop component was present from day one, and that was super important for why this pilot worked so well. Couple quick challenges and caveats. So, accuracy and hallucination were also present during this time. So, that verification step is important. There was a couple times and lessons learned through the pilot experience where folks just copied and pasted and had to be retrained on. No, it's really important to make sure that there is a verification step of the output. Habit formation was really, really tough as well, because this is an entirely new way of thinking about how we work. And so some users never ended up integrating the tools into their daily flow. And we saw that from the overall statistics. Outside of the super users who were integrating it across their daily workflows, and that's only 30% of the folks, the remaining 70% never fully integrated that. So that habit formation is super important to get started right now. And the best thing about habit formation, you don't just become a superstar athlete or musician or insert any sort of practice makes perfect. And what I want to make sure that as a listener, you understand, you might feel, oh, I'm not close to using it for all of my workflows. I use it maybe once a week. Get it to twice a week, then 3 times a week, then maybe once a day. Every little step that you make is habit forming. When I started generative AI using it, I didn't immediately capture the understanding of I need to use this for every single thing. And even as I'm using it today, I'm still learning ways in which I can integrate it into my daily flow even more. And so it's a continuous learning process here, and the habit formation is really something to be cognizant of. Make sure you understand, like, you don't have to just be using it 30 times a day out of the gate. Would that be great? Absolutely. But if you just start every single day with just give me 10 different ways generative AI can help me today, you'll start along that process. Some other caveats, there were some privacy concerns. So there was a need for sensitive data and making sure that only the proper data was used inside the enterprise system. The government has access to a lot of different types of information about people, and some of that is sensitive and wasn't allowed to be used in the enterprise system for good reason. So privacy is still something that has to be monitored, but you can still start capturing and making these habits and addressing the low-hanging fruit by starting today. Well, actually, the best time to start was yesterday. Last but not least, a quick caveat. The volunteers for this pilot, they skewed in the 35 to 54-year-old range and were postgraduate individuals, so they had graduated college. So results can't just be blanket applied to the entire world. A couple of lessons learned that went on. Setting the team up for success was super important. They specifically called out the benefit of creating communities of practice, as well as clear resources with just step-by-step guides on low effort, high impact usage. Additionally, the use of training AI ambassadors was super helpful so that AI ambassadors could help bring up the knowledge level and conceptualize and spark innovation and new ways to use generative AI. Speaking of, if you need help with this, drop me an email. You can do that at alex@loloai.com. So that's alex@LOLOLAI.com. And I'm happy to work together on making that happen. It's something that I do on a daily basis. Some quotes directly from users and the study itself. ChatGPT felt like having an incredibly reliable and resourceful counterpart in the workplace. Another one was, I can sift thousands of classifications in minutes, then use my expertise to validate. Really impactful usages of generative AI here. So that was a quick use case, kind of diving into how Pennsylvania enterprise pilot really drove a lot of value within the 175 volunteers. So I want to start talking a little bit about some things you can do today. Because after all, we're talking about practical prompting here. Creating that habit that I mentioned being super impactful is just asking generative AI for 10 ways generative AI could help. You don't have to use specific information that's proprietary or whatnot. You can just approach it from I'm doing this job. What are 10 ways generative AI could help? Or you start analyzing your tasks and be like, I'm doing this job. What are 10 different tasks that I use? And you can ask that to generative AI. If you get to the point where every day you're asking generative AI for 10 ways generative AI can help you complete a task, complete an action item that you're working on, a project, something that's been nagging and holding over your head, by the time that you're in 10 with 10 work days, you've come up with 100 different ways of leveraging generative AI that you probably haven't thought of before. And so when you start thinking about forming this habit, try using the rule of 10, where you just ask generative AI for 10 ways it can help, or for 10 different tasks that you work on. Bonus points if you can ask generative AI for 10 ways it can help 10 times a day. In the span of 10 days, you'll be at 1,000 different ideas on how generative AI can help you. So no task is too small. Just put it in there. Ask. The next thing is that there's a scoreboard here. But it's changing from how the scoreboard has classically been. So when you're thinking about generative AI, think in terms of impact versus effort, and using that chart to help you identify what are the things that you can start doing which classically would have been very impactful but high effort, and maybe they're not anymore. Revisit those action items and pick a couple of them. Ask for 10 different ways that generative AI can help. Go to the parking lot of ideas that have just been nagging on the wall that it's like, man, I wish we could do that. Ask generative AI for 10 ways that it could solve those problems. And then additionally, in order to help with this whole, let's use the lessons learned from the generative AI pilot in Pennsylvania, sharing lists of best practices, creating healthy discussions on how you can use generative AI. The best way I've found is just going at the team sync, and every single person each week has to have at least one way that they've used generative AI in the past week. And what you'll find is that there's a lot of one-upsmanship that happens there. It's competition in a very safe way because there's not really a wrong answer. But at the same time, people don't want to show up to the meeting and say, oh yeah, I just used it to summarize an email. Because they said that last week, and the week before, and the week before that. And their colleague is saying, oh, I made a project plan for this thing that was on our parking lot. We now have exact tactical actions we have to do if we want to make this happen. And here's the value of this project projected based on the insights that generative AI can help create. So here's a couple of quick win pilot ideas you can get done right now. Meeting notes, obviously, and into creating, like taking a meeting note or a transcription of a meeting and putting it into an action item. Like, just what are the action items associated with this? Craft me a follow-up email on like the next week's agenda for this specific meeting. You can get into vendor email summarizing and draft replies, and then users just have to double check and make sure, hey, this makes sense. There's root cause analysis for incidents and drafting that root cause analysis framework, what we're going to do about it, what the next steps are. You can check out some sort of inventory variance explainer, where it starts talking about like, where is inventory and why is it off base from where we would expect. There's shift handoffs you can do where when you're in an operational environment, you have to pass off to your counterpart who's taking over the night shift or the shift after you. There's ways that you can have an auto-generated brief with just public. These are all things that you can do with publicly available enterprise systems. I mean, you can even remove out some of the sensitive data and use these systems as a personal individual, not even within the firewalls of your company, and still get a tremendous amount of value out of it. Again, not using internal proprietary information, but just walking through how somebody in a similar position would solve this problem, and coming into the table with like, here's a project plan on what needs to happen. And then you just fill in a couple numbers from the proprietary information that you have. All right, I know I've been talking for a bit. I want to end with a quick call to action. If you rate or review this podcast, do so. If you want more content like this, if you send me an email to alex@loloai.com, so that's ALEX at LOLOLAI.com, with a screenshot showing a quick review, I will send you a free Udemy course link. There's a $50 Udemy course that I created, which is about how you can prompt like a pro. And that is I'll give you the free coupon to do so. Again, this has been Practical Prompting, and I'm your host, Alex Kalish. I look forward to talking with you more next time on how to prompt practically.